Eeryk and Simon.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, hello, and welcome to the Eeryk and Simon show. It is wonderful to see you all here this evening. I'm here with young Eeryk McRae. Good evening, Eeryk. How you doing?
Hey Simon, yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks. It was when you hit me up the other day and you're like, "Oh, do you want to do this show with me?" I thought, hmm, is there anyone that could make Simon look rational, or maybe the other way around, maybe someone that makes me look rational? So I couldn't say no after that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we talked about doing this for a while, and we were sitting in the pub a couple of weeks ago, and Georgina said, "Hey, why aren't you guys doing a show?" And that kind of spurred us on to do it. And I think it was a really good suggestion. I think we'd both been thinking about it, and she kind of motivated us to do it.
Yeah, and it was I think for me, it's something that I'm really, really good at. Kind of bouncing off of other people and taking the opportunity to I don't know. I'm far better in a more confrontational sort of situation where someone's got a point, I've got another point, and sometimes I just get annoyed at myself when I'm just talking to a screen alone. And so having someone else to do that with, I feel like is I don't know, a step forward or something different that is, I don't know, probably got a bit more potential.
Yeah, I think so too, and I hope that we do more than this one episode. I hope it all goes well. Because having ideas to bounce off another person, plus having the ability to separate the production tasks from the presentation tasks, I think is really important. But just on that, just a little bit of housekeeping, guys. We're going out tonight on Eeryk's channels and on mine, so we're across YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, Rumble, and X. There is a little bit of a limitation, though, and that is that your comments won't come up if you are connected to Eeryk's channels. But the good thing is that Eeryk is actually monitoring that stuff, and I can actually see in this view that I'm going to have to bring up the comments from everyone. But I see that some of the regulars have joined us. Good evening, Joel. Joel is saying live and unscripted and unfiltered. Yeah, basically. That whatever's on state media, yeah, exactly right. Like between the two of us, it is absolutely unscripted. We've got an idea of some of the things we'd like to talk about, and we're just going to see where it goes. Quiet Night is here. Good evening. So is Kiwis Can Skate. Hello, mate. Nice to see you. Shelley the Kiwi is here, who says hello, boys. And 6469420 big. This is great. High expectations. Oh goodness gracious. Well, I hope that we can come up to them, because at the end of the day, we're just a couple of dudes making it up as we go along. Free Rangers here. Good evening. Good evening. Oh, and Shortland Chambers as well. Who loves the flag behind Eeryk. All right, guys, it looks like I've got to bring the comments up. I can see they're not on screen. It's just, that's what you get when Simon is doing the production rather than Eeryk. You get a whole bunch of errors. All right, but what I thought I would do is come to the first article that we wanted to talk about. And this was a subject that both of us spoke about what was going to happen in 2025 and if there was going to be a return to rationalism. The world has been undertaking a whole lot of wokery, and one of my hopes is, one of the silver linings, I think, of a Trump presidency is that the world is starting to turn away from wokeism and returning to rationalism. And this is something that Eeryk and I thought we would talk about. And that's across a whole bunch of different fields. It's everything from the climate nonsense through to gender ideology, all of that sort of thing, and we're starting to see it. All right, so here's our first article that I'll bring up, just making sure that we can see that. Okay. Sorry guys, share this tab instead. All right, Eeryk, can you see that?
Yep, all good.
Okay, all good. Guys, this comes to us from Bloomberg, and I thought it was really interesting. It's about Wall Street's top banks are quitting the Climate Alliance. And I'll just read a little bit of that to you guys. Excuse me. The Net Zero Banking Alliance, a group dedicated to helping lenders reduce their carbon footprints, has in quick succession been abandoned by Goldman Sachs Group, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Bank of America, and Morgan Stanley. JP Morgan Chase, the largest US bank, looks to be next in line. The move reflects US banks' desire to shield themselves from increasing political pressure as Donald Trump returns to the White House, according to people familiar with the matter who asked not to be identified, la-di-da. The NZBA is bracing for more US exits. Secretariat lead Sarah Cammett told members in December. In a December 31 letter sent by Bloomberg, she cited the political environment. I take the view that many of these bankers realize that there's no money in it. Go woke, go broke, and they're just using the excuse of a Trump presidency to look to exit what they know is not profitable. Eeryk, what do you reckon?
Well, yeah, I think you were hitting on it there a little bit. Is they see Trump coming in, and it's like, okay, well, if I'm making all of these changes, which I don't think are politically correct, I can just blame it on Trump. You see, Trump's this guy that's coming in. He's a this massive renowned fascist that we all have come to love over the last 8 years, and if we can blame all of our changes as as a bank or whatever other industry or organization you're part of on Trump, then you can take the accountability out of it and do whatever the hell you want and essentially do what you need to make sure you stay in business and get that money coming in.
Okay, so you think that do you think that this is something that they wanted to do, or that they were just going to kind of do anyway?
Um, Look, I think at the end of the day, no matter what they want to do, money comes first, and that at the end of the day, money comes first. And so, if they want to kind of retain their personal positions and achieve what they want to do, whilst still bringing in money, then they need to ensure they can balance the perception from I don't know their stakeholders or um, the woke idiots who are throughout our world, of course. What I'm trying to say is they will do what they can to make money while still trying to uphold this whatever ridiculous belief system that they have. And as long as they're removing the accountability from themselves, they'll do whatever they can.
Yeah, and I think that it's been profitable for these organizations, including the banks, to embrace ESG policies to keep their major shareholders happy. Organizations like BlackRock, that are these kind of like super corporations that are big enough and huge enough with trillions of dollars under management that they can influence affairs inside these really, really large corporations. But what I think is fascinating about it is that there is a move away from it, that somehow now they are liberated to be able to do that. And it reminds me about Elon Musk, and guys, Eeryk and I want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on with Elon Musk. We'll do that a bit later. But isn't it really interesting that we've got a billionaire now who can actually put his head up above the parapets and say, no, I don't want to do this stuff anymore. This is wrong, and kind of calling it how it is. It's really different to, like, if you look at some of the things that Mark Zuckerberg was doing a few years ago, don't you reckon?
Yeah, and what I find interesting about Mark Zuckerberg is he's basically just taken this black pill, or at least learned how to dress himself and live his life like a conservative or someone that's not completely down the left wing rabbit hole. And so now I look at him and I'm like, you could be any random, you know, 30-year-old conservative podcaster who works out, eats well, and then you kind of it's almost as if he's putting on this kind of
Facade.
facade, yeah, to try and I don't know, do um, I don't know, do a little bit of rebranding to distract from what he's really doing with his, with Meta, which at the end of the day, I still haven't really seen anything to suggest that's changed at all, other than the fact that he knows how to dress now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think it's all completely fake, and Facebook is still a heart of wokery. I mean, it's not as bad as Blue Hair Sky, but it's pretty bad. And when you look at what that guy has done, he was instrumental in helping to suppress the truth around the Hunter Biden laptop story prior to the last American election, for example. And
Yeah.
yet he's now trying to reinvent himself. And it's almost like it just seems very, very Machiavellian. Like it's not what he truly believes. He's just doing it because it's in his personal and business interests. Don't you reckon?
Oh yeah, 100%. And someone that I try not to use Facebook, for example, very often because it's just such a terrible app. Um, but I sit here and scratch my head with the fact that we live in a world where people objectively think that Facebook, Instagram, all of that is a superior product to the likes of X. I mean, we're using X right now, having this conversation, and I'm sure. I mean, you're streaming to Instagram, but you know, I don't think me and you would be in the position we are right now unless it was for Elon Musk taking over X. Meanwhile, you've got this ancient fossil of an app called Facebook, which is just continuing to decline.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it has enabled us, people like us, but I think it's enabled everyone, right? Like it's certainly the case that if you and I were doing this 3 or 4 years ago, we would have been immediately cancelled, right?
Yep.
Our accounts would be closed on the various social media platforms. There'd be huge pylons and all that sort of thing. We would be amongst the first targets, but everyone would be a target, right? Like, people in the audience would also be cancelled. And I think that it's fantastic that the world is changing and that we are able to discuss issues that perhaps we weren't able to in the past. There was an article about this. Eeryk, can you see this? I've brought it up.
Yep.
It's in Spiked. You can see that. Okay. Well, this came to us from Luke Conway in Spiked a couple of weeks ago, and it struck my eye. And this is on the topic of how, like to me, it seems that 2025 beckons to be the year where wokery ends, or at least the pushback against it really commences in earnest. And I think a large part of the motivation for that is people like Elon Musk, but also it's people like Donald Trump. And for all their missteps and for all of the things that they do wrong, I think that is certainly something that is great. And with the leftists know that they have pushed too far, so they are very much pushing that they're pulling back and looking to consolidate their wins. And this was picked up by Patrick West, who said and he describes how the left fell to authoritarianism. American psychologist and sociologist Luke Conway has been observing this development for some time. Like countless others who write about this topic, he is of the traditional centre left. While he hasn't so much moved to the right, he has seen how the left in the US and beyond has drifted to the extreme. Seduced by voguish and outlandish narratives about race and gender, it has adopted an absolutist mindset that has little patience for disagreement. I think all of us would agree that that is a fairly fair analysis. Do exactly as it says on the tin, so to speak. It explains how today's autocratic spirit derives from erstwhile liberals. You will see authoritarian leftists censor, bully, silence, harass, and destroy their enemies, says Conway. Conway points to the example of Mumford & Sons co-founder Winston Marshall, whose decision to speak out against Antifa in 2021 led to his social ostracism and eventual departure from the band. Eeryk, that kind of reflects what you think, right? Like, here's a guy who got cancelled for pretty much expressing mainstream opinions like you are now.
Yep. I mean, look. I mean, it's what we've all come to observe quite regularly over the last few years, in particular. I mean, I was cancelled, and well, I wouldn't say fully cancelled, but I had my account, indefinitely suspended only about 18 months ago. For I can't even recall what it was about now. And that just came out of the blue. Wasn't sure what was going on, and fortunately, it was kind of just as Elon was taking over X, and I managed to get my account back within 2 or 3 days. But that was again for sharing what is a reasonably standard opinion that most people generally have. But this is what the left these days. This is what they thrive on. They thrive on rejecting the idea that there is such thing as objective truth. And when you reject the idea of objective truth, then nothing really can be true. And you get into a situation where it's whoever can yell what the truth is the most or yell their position the loudest, that ends up becoming what we're all supposed to believe. And if you have the ability to cancel this person, cancel that person, then you just give yourself the ability to dictate what everyone else believes. And objectivity really just gets pushed aside completely. And that's what we're fortunately being able to avoid now, because we've got platforms like X where you can say almost anything, before you start getting into a little bit of hot water.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think that this is the basic, rather the intrinsic barrenness of left wing political thought, is that they are postmodernists. And in their postmodernism, they reject the enlightenment of logic, reason, critical thinking, the scientific method, and the empirical method. And you hear them saying things like, my truth or my lived experience and things like this. And you are exactly right. Their attitude is something is true if enough people screech it from the rooftops. And I think finally we're reaching the stage where the vast majority of people are just rejecting that as just being absolute nonsense.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's postmodernism for sure. Except postmodernism is almost epitomizes what it is in its own kind of just trying to explain it on its own um, is very to some degree lacks any objectivity. And so it kind of fits what it is very well. And that's why I usually refrain from even mentioning postmodernism because then you'll get some crazy postmodernist lefty coming into my chat trying to tell me, oh, explain what it means. I'm like, I'll explain what it means. It means that you are batshit crazy and you want the rest of us to believe that what you believe is true. So, yeah, yeah, you hit it on the head with the postmodernist stuff. And and whilst it's all well and good for us to slowly be realizing as a society that these, these far fetched, my truth, their truth stuff is nonsense. Unfortunately, it's not the average person that's really in a position to make the important changes, at least in the short term. It's all of those people in positions of power, and for example, in academia, who are teaching our younger generations until we can start making some gains in the number of people, with their head screwed on, getting into the education space, even into our scientific areas, and into positions of power, we're kind of stuck at a bit of a crossroads where we're butting heads.
Yeah, I think that's right, and many of the academics that I know that come from the hard sciences, and they've just been absolutely aghast at how their institutions have been taken over by this, and they've been forced, if they want to keep their positions, to keep quiet and keep their heads down. And the good thing is in Great Britain and New Zealand, there is legislation going through to ensure free speech, although Labour in the United Kingdom is in the process of repealing that. And it's to stop this sort of thing happening because at the end of the day, in our academic institutions, there are many, many people, as you say, who are not really academics. They might have a doctorate, they might be holding a professorship, but in point of fact, they are anything but academic because they reject the Enlightenment. It means nothing to them, and they believe in this things like Mataranga Maori are being taught as an actual science. I want to come back to this article, but guys, I see there's been a whole bunch of comments. I can't say hello to everyone, but I see all of you in there, and I'll say a general good evening to everyone. If you're enjoying our broadcast, the first one that Eeryk and I have ever done, please do like and share it out so that other people know we're here. Joel in the chat says Mark Zuckerberg is LARPing as a conservative. I think you're right. Eeryk and I would it be fair to say that we agree. Maya is here. Yep. Sorry, I can't see the emoticon. Maverick Kiwi says, with him allowing government backdoors into FB to censor anything they like really grinds my gears. Yeah, Maverick Kiwi, you're right. And New Zealand availed themselves of that under the Ardern government. The Ardern government could just have backdoor access into Facebook to suppress anything that they like. And Mark Zuckerberg, what's the term for it? He facilitated that on behalf of a Labour government, which just makes it entirely hypocritical for him now to be presenting himself as a conservative. And I'll just say, Eeryk, if you've got any comments from your followers that I can't see that you'd like to address, please just let me know. Joel says, "Oh yeah, you
no,
don't."
no, 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 I'm good.
Okay, all right. Joel says, as toxic as the opinions on X might be, at least there's transparency and no excuse for people to point fingers and say that XYZ came out of a vacuum. That's true. Terrible says, Elon still has the majority of his car business in China. Yeah, Terrible, like while Zuckerberg is a fake, it is fair to say that Elon, I think, is a lot more genuine, but he is also, as everyone does, presenting a facade to the world. Gas Giant says Zuck does what he's told. He's a puppet. That's to a large extent that's true. I would think. And Dirk Hop, good evening, says Facebook is aka LifeLog, DARPA intelligence gathering program. Yeah, well, it is fair to say that all of those three-letter agencies in the United States would have access to all of that sort of stuff. But it's not just social media, right? Intel would be doing deals with those three-letter agencies. They would have access to the actual silicon. Free Range says, feels like a payoff. End wokery. We, but must accept digital ID and central bank digital currencies. That's what's coming. I feel Whitney Webb. I don't know who Whitney Webb is, but yeah, that's another topic that perhaps Eeryk and I might do on another episode, is about things like digital IDs and CBDCs. Phil is here. Good evening. I reject the idea of objective truth. Intersubjective truth, however, is definitely a thing. Okay, that is good to know. Guys, I will catch up on the comments in a little bit. There's another little bit in here about the left that I wanted to hear. I wanted to read and to get Eeryk's reaction to. Hold up. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. This is why liberal bullies have got away with their behaviour for so long. They rule by fear and opponents are duly cowed. Their triumphs in silencing dissent in the culture sphere has only emboldened them further and made their behaviour worse. This has not only rendered them ever more power hungry, but also ever more stupid. Conway explains research in social psychology shows that critical thinking often decreases in the majority when the minority is silenced. What can we do about it? Well, this question is posed in the article. What can be done to fight back? Indeed, if wokery is on the retreat, as Simon hopes it is, and I'm sure Eeryk does too, as many have recently claimed, do we even need to fight back now the tide has turned? Many declare that the Democratic defeat in the most recent US presidential election has dealt identity politics and hyper-liberalism a mortal blow. It is debatable whether woke is moribund. An endless stream of stories this year alone suggests woke has become tacitly normalized, not eradicated. What do you reckon, Eeryk?
I think, well, the idea that the US election result has had some dramatic impact on perhaps maybe what we generally think the I don't know, the standing of wokeism in society is. I think that's probably a little bit of a mistake to believe that, because when we actually look at it, it's a few million swing voters either way in the most politically divided nation in the West. So um, yeah, I don't look at Trump managing to, to secure an election victory as that much of a win outside of having control of policy. Having control of the legislation being passed through Congress in the US, which I think is important for at least the standing and the future of the US, and importantly what that does for the rest of the world. But as far as the battle, we could call it the culture war between, common sense and wokeism. I don't know how much of an impact that's really going to have in terms of, what the average individual thinks. Because I do think we still live in a world where the majority aren't these postmodernist lunatics. But I think too many people in the majority are completely unaware of just how much lunacy there is going on in academic spaces and in our positions of power. And as such, when they go to the ballot box, they're not thinking about, okay, should I vote for Kamala Harris, the DEI hire who has done nothing good in her career, or should I vote for Donald Trump, who the media tells me is X, Y, and Z? They're not thinking about the what's at the real heart of each of the movements because they're either not engaged in it or they are simply I'm not sure, not aware that it's even an issue to begin with.
which is I agree with you, and I think it's a situation that's exacerbated by the media. For those who aren't political tragics and rely upon the media for their news, they can be convinced of anything, and because they're not particularly paying attention, they're not sort of, and because these arguments from the left are often pushed in such a way that they seem reasonable, that people just go along with it. Like it often surprises me, for example, the huge number of women that vote against their interests because the media tells them that Jacinda Ardern is wonderful, and oh look, here's this young mother, she's everything that you want. Never mind the fact that she's an extremist and intellectually subnormal. This is the person you should vote for, and a whole bunch of people who aren't necessarily paying attention very much do. And as you say, that leads to a circumstance where people do get peaked, where it's like, hang on a second, I voted for Jacinda Ardern and I voted for Chloe Swarbrick, and now they're beating up women in public parks. That's not what I was expecting when the media was showing me a picture of the happy couple.
Yeah, exactly that. And then on top of it, when I discuss the swing voters in the US, it's not like all of them have suddenly, kind of had a light bulb moment and thought, oh, okay, actually, yeah, the left are kind of insane. You have to factor in a bunch of other things in there too, such as, well, the economy is not exactly good, so they're not even thinking about this whole, oh yeah, maybe the Democrats aren't, what's in the best interest of my daughter when she goes to college. I just care about the economy a little bit more than, or I trust the Republicans to deal with that more so than I do the Democrats. And so, even though we've seen this shift from the Democrats to the Republicans in 4 years, I, I would argue that in terms of what that means for the future of wokeism in society, it's minimal to nothing. Um, but fortunately, at the very least, we are seeing a shift in the amount of anti woke content, at least online. But I think that's more so because of platforms like X and people just saying, you know what, stuff it, I don't really care what people have to say about it anymore. I'm just going to speak my mind. It's got more to do with that and less to do with political elections.
Okay. All right. Well, look, on that note, guys, we might take a break just for a few minutes. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the comments come up in this particular scene, so I'll try and fix that. But we might just play a little bit of music for a little bit, and then we'll come back, have a chat on the comments, and get Eeryk's thoughts on the next article. You are watching the Eeryk and Simon show. We are very, very pleased to have your company with us on a Monday night. Here's some tunes. Okay, guys. It looks like I've fixed the comments, so you should be able to see that again behind me in the interview screen. And just on the comments, I thought I'd go through some of them. Sorry, guys. There's quite a few people commenting. I don't know how many people are tuned into you, Eeryk, but across mine, I think we've got about maybe 350, 400 people. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Simon and Eeryk show. How many are coming through on your channels?
Oh, we currently got around 90 on X and just a small handful on YouTube.
Oh, okay. All right, fantastic. Okay, turning to the comments. Maverick Kiwi says, there isn't a single unifying objective truth. Perspective limits this, and most people's perspective is swayed by MSM, among other things. Gas Giant says, academia has been lost. Gas Giant, you might be right, but Eeryk and I both hope that it is recoverable. Shelley the Kiwi, good evening, says, I like Trump and Musk, but always remind myself they are red angels. They're here to help us with this fight, but they do have an alternative motive for themselves with their actions. Shelley, I think you think that because you are a very wise lady. Joel says, Whitney Webb is a trailblazing journalist, and everyone else is saying that I should pay attention to her. Thanks, guys, for the tip. I shall. Phil says the exact same thing with the extreme tribalism throughout the campaign in the US. Trump's first term was hailed as an end to wokeness by the Gamergate crowd. Phil, yeah, I'd be interested in what you think about that. I haven't made that connection. Gas Giant says there is a generation who don't know how to be non-woke. They have really seen it. Gas Giant, I think you're right. And Eeryk kind of made that point about what is happening in education and how kids are coming out just programmed with this stuff. And Eeryk, you were in education a lot more recently than I was. What was it actually like a few years ago when you were going through high school and stuff?
I'll tell you what, high school, in my experience, is some foreign universe compared to what it seems to be now. Nowadays at high school, the non-binaries are a thing. Non-binary didn't exist 8 years ago when I was at high school. So that's why I'm like, what's happened in 8 years that it's gone from, you know, the idea of non-binary and most woke ideology just didn't seem to even breach the consciousness of our classrooms, and now all of a sudden it's everywhere. It's happened so quickly, and it confuses me to some degree.
Yeah, I don't get I don't get why it's like that either. But hey, it absolutely is, and yet the forces of it. Like you look at the trade unions that control teaching in this country. Well, it's not really teaching; it's indoctrination. Anyone who's employed as a teacher in New Zealand, well, most of them aren't actually teachers. That's their title, but that is not the role that they perform. Are just absolutely vociferous on this stuff, and I think that is one of the bastions of wokery that really does need to be tackled. That these people are there programming children from very, very young ages into all of this sort of NPC type behavior. What do you reckon is a good strategy to get rid of it all?
Uh, Good strategy, get rid of it all. I really don't know. I think probably, if anything, just encouraging younger people with more moderate views to get involved in teaching in academic spaces, and then to also encourage other people who are interested in media and influencing, as well as politics, to that are moderates or even conservatives, to just get more and more involved and start speaking out and continue to speak out. For everyday people to just speak out, bring all their concerns to, I don't know, their schools, their board of trustees, their local electors, and whatever. I think the more people speak up, the more people with differing views just get involved in all the different areas of society, then that's really the only way forward that I think the average person could probably try and get involved with.
Yeah, I think that's probably but do you think that there might be something legislative that we can do? Like, would you like to have Erica Stanford doing something around that type of thing? Like saying, look, you're just not allowed to. It's against the law to be teaching this stuff now.
I think there's certain things where you certainly could legislate against certain things without overstepping, or acting in a way that some might label authoritarian, um, or just not. See, this is the thing. I like to I'm kind of moving away from this whole idea that I agree with libertarianism, because in some cases I just simply do not. Um, but at the same time, I do feel like without a without putting reins on your legislators, to, and without expecting them to refrain from legislating against things, they'll just legislate against everything. And then when you lose control of what they're legislating against, that becomes a big problem. And so I'm always hesitant to agree with or even propose that they legislate against certain beliefs or against teaching certain things unless it's harmful. And in this case, there are certainly things that are being taught or certain ways that um, certain institutions are running that you could deem harmful. And so approaching that with care is probably important.
Okay, so what would that look like for you?
Um, oh, look, I think robust discussions, firstly, with if we want to just start with schools, for example, robust discussions with I don't know. Uh, I want to say teachers, but almost want to leave them out. But just robust discussions with the people that are involved with schools, that be that the teachers, be that the principals, um, the students, as well as the parents of all the students, and looking at what do they want and what do they expect out of schools, and then just ensure that any such regulation reflects what they want, or what a balanced look of what all of that is. Um, and if that means cutting out certain things, then go for it. Um, but I don't like the idea of fully restricting things for restriction's sake. If there's a way around it where you're not just saying no, we're burning that book over there, or no, we're preventing any kind of discussion of this. I think there just needs to be very, very clear expectations.
Yeah, on the engagement with parents, I think that's really critical. And you know that under current legislation, every school board is required to liaise with the school community once every 2 years about what they're specifically teaching inside the RSE education. The RSE education, it's not education. What it is rainbow
Yeah.
indoctrination. It's them trying to convince 5-year-olds that they were born in the wrong body and all that sort of just absolute wokery on steroids. Now, one of the proposals, the pushback against New Zealand First's approach to getting all of that troonery removed from young people, being presented to young people in schools, is from the activist groups and including the teachers' trade unions, who are really bitterly opposed to it. And one of their proposals I saw a couple of weeks ago was that they don't want to, they want to remove the requirement to actually liaise with teachers, rather with parents in the school community. They want to just get on with it like they do in California, right? Where teachers troon out children at school and deliberately don't tell the parents, and teachers here want to do that too. So two things occur to me, and why I'm in favor in legislating what teachers can say and do in the classroom is, firstly, as we discussed before, there are a huge number of people who are just simply not aware of what is going on, of what their kids are actually being taught in school, firstly. And secondly, you have all of this pushback from the vested interests on the left, including the unions, want to suppress that information to ensure that teachers are not are required to liaise with them. So I think a better approach is to, to put these people back in the box and say, teacher, if you are telling a 5-year-old about your sexuality, you are a threat to them and you are going to lose your job. That is illegal to do. You cannot talk to a 5-year-old about their gender, about your sex life, anything like that. And I've got to tell you, for my generation, young fella, for my generation, I didn't even, for many of my teachers, I didn't even know their first names. right? They were Mr. This and Miss That, and let alone what their sexual preferences were. But here, in today's schools, that is the first thing that any child knows about them, and I think that a big part of the pushback needs to come with a bit more of a hammer. I would prefer a bit more of a hammer, I think, than you would.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I do think regulating certain things that a teacher can be open about or talk about is fair game in my opinion. As you said, there's no reason at all for a teacher to be telling a 5-year-old what their sexuality is. And of course, so in principle, I agree with all that. I'm just, it's more my issue with politicians having the power to regulate um, than anything else, than the specific issue. So in principle, I agree with ensuring that teachers can't talk to 5-year-olds about crazy stuff. But also, I'm not the most comfortable with politicians regulating every little tiny thing in our lives. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd take quite a libertarian point of view there. I think that that the less government, the less laws on that sort of stuff, the better. But there is a social contract, right? From a libertarian perspective, we have a social contract where it's like, okay, we've decided that we need a government to be making some decisions that are in the interests of the community. Here are the people that are going to do that. Here are the institutions that help them achieve it. And there are times when our collective will needs to be enforced upon transgressors, if you ask me. Guys, I'm sorry I'm not keeping up very well with the comments. Eeryk, have you got any of your followers you want to talk about?
I do have one from Hugh Stafford, and he says, "You guys just remind me of a theory I have. Left-right politics is a religion. They have their priests and their source of one truth, things to idolize, theories that can't be proven." Um, and I suppose to a degree, I mean, you get the pretty hardcore leftists and the hardcore people on the right. Um, and I'd say there are certainly some people that, let's use Trump for example, that idolize Trump. It's less than just hey, he's probably the best option for right now, or one of the best options for right now. Let's get him in, see what he can do. And it's more of a, he is the second coming of Christ. Let's elect him. He's going to save the world. So there certainly is a degree of that on either side of the spectrum. Um, but, but yeah, I might not go as far as religion.
But he is right to raise the point that there is tribalism on both sides, and this comes into like there's a lot of discussion at the moment on the right about what they're calling the woke right, and I would say that like normally that term is applied to people who are kind of like to a degree ethno-nationalists and things like that. But I do also think that there are people that are like that, that as you say, they can see nothing wrong with Trump whatsoever, that, he's the God King to them, and any criticism, however mild, is just simply not tolerated from them because they are tribally associated with it. All right, but speaking about that, guys, I have an article here. Let's see if I can find it. It's about the fact that about Trump and TikTok, and I thought I'd bring that up. But guys, just give me a moment because I need to be able to share it with Eeryk as well. Hold on, so that he can see the article because he's looking in a different window from all of the rest of us. Where is that for Eeryk? Gosh, why is that such a pain, Eeryk? Okay, there we go. All right, so let me just change this window so that you guys can all see it too. And I think I have to bring Eeryk's audio back in over here. Yes, I do. Okay, guys, this is an article that came to us from DRG News. For those who don't know, the US passed a law from this is from Joe Biden as president and a Democrat controlled Congress and Senate, that they were going to ban TikTok outright inside the United States unless it was sold to an American interest. Now, that is scheduled to occur on the 19th of January, so 13 days from now. In 14 days from now, Donald Trump is inaugurated as the president. And so I have a couple of questions for Eeryk. The first one that I'm going to ask in a moment is about the suspicious timing of that. But the second is, I just thought I'd read a little bit about this, read a little bit of this article to get the rest of you up to speed. Trump asked Supreme Court to delay TikTok ban so he can weigh in after he takes office. The fate of TikTok is keeping creators and small business owners in anxious limbo as they await a decision from the Supreme Court that could upheld their livelihoods. Upend, I think they mean. On January 10th, the court will hear arguments on a law requiring TikTok to break ties with its Chinese parent-based company, ByteDance, or face a US ban. For creators, the TikTok doomsday scenarios are nothing new since President-elect Donald Trump first tried to ban the platform through executive order during his first term. But despite Trump's recent statements indicating he now wants TikTok to stick around, the prospect of a ban has never been as big as it is now, with the Supreme Court serving as the final arbiter. Eeryk, what do you reckon?
Well, as for the timing, I don't think you get timing like that unless it's deliberate. Um, that's just too perfect of a timing. And as for Trump, I'm trying to think. He kind of gave everyone the impression, particularly the young generation, in the build up to the election, that he would save it. He would he'd move away from his kind of stance in this first term, and I think he may have taken some advice from some people about at least this particular piece of legislation for banning it. And yeah, I don't think he will be in favor of continuing or going ahead with this ban, because anyone that's actually looking at the real intention of this, um, anyone looking at it will realize that it's merely the US government dictating what platforms you can and cannot use. And if this would set a precedent, meaning, okay, you know what? I don't think that it's in the national security interest of the US for Facebook to exist anymore, or for, I don't know, Truth Social to exist anymore. And so let's just make sure that in the US, you cannot use this app any longer. And that's the precedent it will set. And that's not the sort of power you want a government to have, certainly not in the US. So, yeah, I think either Trump has not taken any advice at all, has just changed his mind. But I certainly don't see Trump going ahead and agreeing with it being banned.
Okay. Maverick Kiwi in the chat says, isn't TikTok in China educational only? In the Western world, it is distractions only, I think. Maverick, yeah, I've heard that is said. But to address Eeryk's point, Eeryk, I think that it could be a little bit more self-interested. And that, the thing is, like I would draw a parallel with the American deep state looking to ban TikTok for the same reason that the Americans banned a variety of techniques for microprocessor development, at small nanoscales, trying to interrupt and minimize China's growth in the field of microprocessors, right? In both instances, there's a competitive advantage that the Americans want to maintain. Don't forget, for 70 years, they've had the concept of full spectrum dominance. But there's also the fact that those three-letter agencies, the CIA, the NSA, all those sorts of organizations have been involved absolutely everywhere. Like I remember 15 years ago when they were involved with NIST. NIST is the Institute of Standards, which has a worldwide impact. And the NSA convinced NIST to adopt an encryption standard that they could break. Okay, because it was in their interest to do that. It's like, yeah, everyone in the world should use this form of encryption. It's really, really good, but just on the down low, we can break into it. And I think that is the motivation, right? Like I just, like, every microprocessor you can absolutely guarantee, from AMD, from Intel, from ARM, all of those organizations, you can guarantee inside the silicon that the American deep state has backdoor access to it. The same applies to social media. Because TikTok answers to Chinese authorities and not American authorities, the Americans don't like the fact that they don't have that sort of access. And so I think it's really just about dominating other people dominating social media users rather than the American government. What do you reckon?
And I think when it comes down to that, I suppose it would depend if Trump would be on the same page as wanting to ensure that the US has the ability to dominate that market, for example, or dominate that ability to collect data and so forth. Um, whether or not he agrees with following through on a ban for that purpose. Um, and I think that comes back to who's in his ear advising him about this particular issue. Because if you've got some of the same people in his ear as he did the first time around, then I think perhaps he would go through with it. But I think the points that you made are very good, um, and it's certainly yeah, it's certainly given me a slightly different perspective on it all. Of course, I don't think that would be wise for them to go ahead and ban the app in the US. At the same time, um, I don't necessarily like the amount of the position that it puts China in being able to retain access or so much influence over the data of Americans and the rest of the world. But they're going to do that regardless, and it's about the individual, in my opinion, to kind of take precautions to reduce the amount of information anyone gathers from them.
I think that's very true, and I've put a lot of thought into it and a lot of effort. And I've written a bunch of different articles on doing things like maintaining internet privacy. But just coming to that, like many people in the audience will use things like LED lighting, right? Like you have your LED lights that have got a Wi-Fi connection and it plugs in, to your automation. So you're using Amazon's Alexa or you're using Google's Home or something like that, and you can turn your lights on and turn your lights off. Well, the thing is with all of those services, the back end to it is a Chinese company, right? So what happens is between your automation unit, you have, it's listening to you speak in your home, which it sends a request out to Google. Okay, Google makes an API call to a company in China, who then sends the instruction to your lights. So turning on your lights on and off is actually sharing a whole bunch of private information with a whole bunch of different people, right? Google knows what time you go to bed at night. The Chinese government knows what time you get up for work in the morning. All right, and if those things change, that they know it, and people sort of think, oh well, so what? Well, actually, that amount of data that is collected about you is actually extremely valuable, and it's not just to advertisers. For example, insurance companies, right? Like if a company like Google can look at what your lifestyle is like by collecting data about how much time you are spending, the sorts online, the sorts of things you search for, what time you're getting up in the morning, and all that sort of stuff, they can build up a profile of you, which is valuable, all right, to people like insurance assessors who say, oh, goodness gracious, something must be wrong with Eeryk. He's not he's not getting up and going, it doesn't seem to be during work hours. And he's just done a web search for a medication which is used to treat a really rare form of cancer. Guess what? Your insurance premiums are going up because that information is absolutely valuable. And I think that, there's a lot of talk you hear from NATO about how there is the next frontier of warfare is digital, which always has sounded to me like an exaggeration. But, when it comes to a war on the people, all of that technology is in place to collect that sort of data.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, and you know a bit more about the. I mean, you were explaining the process of just talking to Alexa to turn the lights on. Far more informed on that than I am, but it does it does open your mind to it a bit, and you're thinking. I mean, I've got a smartwatch, right? I mean, China always knows where I am, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. Um, it's useful. I need to know my step count, but it's you still try and balance that with, okay, what can I do in my day to day life to reduce the amount of information I'm giving um, to the US government, to China, whatever, and there's only so much you can do, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. Once for Kiwis, who's an old mate of mine, says cheap IP cameras with Chinese chipsets and apps are an infiltration nightmare, which is exactly right. But the same thing is once for Kiwis. That's the same of any technology, right? And my point is that the Americans have been doing it for decades, and they just don't like that the Chinese are now doing it too. Once for Kiwis is actually fairly technical, and maybe interested to know, like, like I get that sort of technology, right? And what I do is that I repurpose them, and there's a bunch of like firmwares around that you can use. Sometimes it requires the use of a soldering iron, but you can reflash a bunch of those devices, particularly if they're using ESP32 chipsets, and make sure that they don't call home, and you can just control them with an application like home automation. There are a whole bunch of those Chinese cameras where that is absolutely not possible. They are so locked down to ensure that they are always phoning home. You just can't get into them. And I got one. It cost me only a couple of bucks, but it's this little device. It's the size of a 50-cent piece, and it does pretty good 1080p. But of course, it's no good to me because it's giving away all of that data. But speaking of that, I might bring up another article because I did want to get on. I told everyone that we would talk about Elon Musk, and so I thought we'd just do a quick bit on that. Hang on, guys. I've just got to. It's a little bit of mucking about to ensure that Eeryk can see it too. And I think that's it. Hang on, I'll just bring up the article for everyone in the audience and make sure that Eeryk's audio is on. It is. Okay, this article, it comes to us from the Telegraph. And it's about Elon Musk, and it's by Roland Oliphant. Fascist or German saviors, the truth about AFD, Musk's new plaything. Now, for those who don't know, the AFD is a right-wing political party, right-wing and nationalist political party in Germany, who are extremely prominent, particularly in regions like Bavaria, and are gaining prominence. They're a lot like Rassemblement National, the party of Marine Le Pen in France. And for a very, very long time, they have been dismissed, these parties, as being fascists or Nazis and all sorts of unfair descriptions which are used to cancel them. And people aren't buying it anymore, and those parties are growing in strength. And a large part of that is because of a growing anti-immigration sentiment inside the European Union. Now, what has happened in all of the European countries is within the European Union is they do a thing called a cordon sanitaire, all right, a sanitary cordon where all of the other parties go into coalition to keep what they consider to be the far right out of government. The problem that all of Europe has is that the cordon sanitaire is fraying in almost every country. They can no longer keep these parties out, and eventually they are going to have to do business with them. This happened over the last couple of days in Austria, where the centre-right government tried to do a deal with the Greens, the Communists and the Socialists to keep out the Freedom Party. The Freedom Party won the general election, and they are the equivalent of AFD in Austria. Those negotiations broke down. Really, the only option for a centre-right government in Austria is, after the upcoming elections, is probably going to be to actually realise the cordon sanitaire is over, and it's time to actually start going into coalition with what they were as recently as yesterday dismissing as far-right parties, and looking to be an ameliorating force upon them. And what complicates the issue and what is making people in Europe very, very angry is that Elon Musk is promoting the AFD, and this article describes it. Mr. Oliphant writes, fascists or German saviors, the truth about AFD, Musk's new plaything. Tesla tycoon Elon Musk's endorsement of Alternative for Germany could legitimize the far-right party amongst business people and ordinary voters, easing its eventual path to power, a member of the movement has said. The tech billionaire, a Donald Trump confidant, caused consternation in Germany last week when he declared the AFD, which includes people who have defended the honor of the SS, the country's last vestige of hope. He also invited Alice Weidel, co-leader and its candidate for Chancellor, to a one-on-one discussion on his social network ahead of Germany's snap general election on February 23rd, dramatically raising her and her party's profile. What do you reckon, Eeryk?
Um, Oh, look, I mean, immigration does seem to be, I think, not everyone would have thought it. I mean, many people, were talking earlier about the whole woke issue. But yeah, for me, that's not really going to be the the thorn in the side of liberals. It's immigration. And you're speaking about how the centre right of all people can't make a deal with the communists to keep a so called fascist threat out. Um, and for me, I think that just speaks to the fact that even moderates, the centre right, the centre left, all of them are just so out of touch with what the real issues are that people are willing to vote for absolutely anything to see something change. They'll vote for actual fascists if it means that they are no longer worrying about a bunch of migrants who are unchecked just swarming over the borders and, I don't know, let's say, um, dealing to the young girls of the UK for the last 25 years. It's things like this which is not talked about enough by those who are actually in power. And as such, anyone can just come out and give a speech about needing to get tough on immigration, and suddenly they'll start turning heads. And I think naturally, Elon Musk is someone who has been speaking a lot about immigration over the last couple of years, and so naturally he's going to, I don't know, let's say, use AFD as a plaything. We talk about them in a way that people on, so-called journalists would use to, I don't know, smear him with or associate him with. So yeah, I'm not too sure. Obviously, I don't really follow German politics much, other than the fact that I know they they really really hate fascists over there.
Yes, well, for one reason or another, the Germans are relatively sensitive about that. Shelley in the chat has just put up a link to reflecticles, and I've put some on. So yeah, these are the sunglasses that Shelley's put a link up to, and their objective is to confuse facial recognition. Although it's probably not working on this live stream, particularly as along with Eeryk's, it's got my name on it. All right, well. The next article about this comes to us from Deutsche Welle. Deutsche Welle is a large English language German media conglomerate. I've watched them in the past. I haven't watched them for a while, but they tended to be quite centrist, maybe a little bit centre left. But they had a comment about this sort of stuff. And this article comes to us from them. It says Elon Musk backs far right AFD in controversial German op-ed. Tech billionaire Elon Musk on Saturday restated his backing for Germany's far-right Alternative for Germany party, calling the party the last spark of hope for the country in an op-ed published by the Welt and Sonntag newspaper. His remarks triggered anger amongst German politicians, with the country 7 weeks away from a snap federal election. It's interesting you get this reaction, right? Like Elon Musk talks about Nigel Farage and he talks about rape gangs in Britain, and all the Brits on the left lose their minds about interference in their elections. They had nothing to say when Keir Starmer sent 100 British Labour Party activists to volunteer for the re-elect Kamala Harris campaign. It seems to me absolutely hypocritical. Same thing with the Germans. They've had an awful lot to say, as many people around the world have, about Donald Trump. Why is it okay for them to do, but not for someone who is an American citizen to do when it is their elections? Shortly after the piece went online, the editor of the opinion piece, Eva Marie Kogel, wrote on X that she had submitted her resignation with a link to the commentary. Musk used his commentary to expand on his post on X last week, claiming that only the AfD can save Germany. In the editorial, he said that the far-right party was the last spark of hope for the country. The portrayal of the AfD as right-wing extremism is clearly false, considering that Alice Weidel, the party's leader, has a same-sex partner from Sri Lanka. Does that sound like Hitler to you? Please, Musk said in the piece. In 2021, Germany's domestic intelligence agency classified the AfD at the national level as a suspected extremist organisation. Musk went on to claim that the AfD adopts strong positions on issues relating to economic recovery, energy supply, and, as Eeryk rightly says, migration control. The AFD, even though it is described as far right, represents a political realism that resonates with many Germans who feel that their concerns are ignored by the establishment. It addresses the problems of the moment without the political correctness that often obscures the truth, the tech billionaire said. I suspect that Elon Musk might have been listening to our boy Eeryk, because that's pretty much what Eeryk just told us. What's your view, Eeryk?
Look, I mean, can you just can you repeat that last little bit for me?
Okay. The AFD, even though it is described as far right, represents a political realism that resonates with many Germans who feel that their concerns are ignored by the establishment. It addresses the problem of the moment without the political correctness that often obscures the truth.
Ah, yes. Yeah, so I mean, I look at that and you were right in saying it's pretty much what I was just saying. Um, but I think it also comes down to the referencing how it's extremists on this side as if the alternative, the status quo, the centre right trying to create a coalition with communists, as if that's somehow not an extremist option. Yeah, we've got the so-called far right fascists over here who are an extremist option versus the far left extremists. What are we supposed to do in this situation? I mean, you saw Rassemblement National in France do reasonably well. Um, at least certainly in the what is it, the European Union elections. Um, but like, what are people in France, in Austria, in Germany? What are they supposed to do when the option is either people who may bring back European fascism, or a group of people who are simply destroying the entirety of Europe single-handedly, unashamedly, and gaslighting everyone into thinking that they're not doing it at all?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Though I think destroying a bit strong. Are you talking about the immigration in Europe?
Oh, certainly
Is that what you mean?
that certainly plays a big role. Yeah, um, but I mean, like, yeah, I mean, which countries in Europe right now have lowest rates of immigration, or at least certainly immigration's less of an issue? I'd look at a place like Poland compared to a place like the UK, and you'd say that Poland's probably in a much better position than the UK as not, maybe not as a direct result,
You're
but it's
making an
certainly playing an
argument
influence.
for homogeneous societies rather than multicultural.
Yes and no. I mean, I think you can certainly have a multicultural society that is well functioning, but I do think there's too much emphasis on having multicultural societies which are inherently divided in the way they live, rather than multicultural societies which work together to ensure that everyone. That's the issue with culture, right? When cultures conflict, you can't really have homogeneity. Um, and so it's about having that balance. I feel like multicultural societies are good when those coming over and integrating do so in a way that's respectful to the culture that's already there, while still having the freedom to go about their way of life to a certain extent, right? If you catch my drift, like, it's one thing to say, let's use this example. If someone from a Muslim country wants to come over to the US, they should be able to do so. They should be able to be Muslim in the US. What they shouldn't be able to do is expect everyone around them to start appeasing, or living their life in a way which is respectful to them, if in doing so they're being disrespectful to the culture that was already existing and already working well.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think because I've been an immigrant to a variety of other countries, and I think that it works best when there's a bit of give and take between enriching your host society with your own culture against assimilating into the host culture.
Mm.
And I think that it's never it's never good when there's enough of an immigrant community to form a critical mass where they don't integrate very well into societies. And I remember seeing that as long ago as 30 years ago in Australia, where there were areas in the major cities where everyone was of a particular cultural background, didn't necessarily speak English, but they could go about their daily lives. Their kids would go to school that was spoken in that was taught in their native language, whether it was Lebanese or Lebanese Arabic, or it was Vietnamese or something like that. They could shop in supermarkets that were like that. They could go to their churches and all that sort of thing. And it was kind of like never the twain shall meet. And I don't think that is what assimilation and cultural enrichment should look like. And I was always very pleased that in New Zealand, no one particular group of people ever emigrated here in large enough numbers to form that kind of critical mass.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And and I was thinking about that before you even started talking of like, we shouldn't have suburbs or entire communities in like Australia called Little Lebanon. We shouldn't. It shouldn't be called Little Lebanon. It shouldn't. It shouldn't feel like walking into bloody Gaza when you're in some Western Sydney suburb. It should not be how it feels. And I could even say this about some sort of Gold Coast suburbs where it's basically just walking into Otara. It shouldn't be like that. Even though Australia and New Zealand do have a lot of similarities, but there are. It was a little bit surprising when you hear people involved in maybe the police force or in the ambulance service who have worked here and then let's say go and work on the Gold Coast, Brisbane, and then all of a sudden they're like, why are the demographics here exactly the same in terms of crime and people needing of in need of support as it is in South Auckland? Because they're just transporting all of the issues that they have in South Auckland, moving to Australia, and then building massive communities with the exact same cultural issues. And when you transport the antisocial, negative um, cultural issues that you have to another place and then you make it big enough, you've not done anything except just change location.
That's true. All right. Well, coming back to Musk, the sentence before that really struck me is this. Musk went on to claim that the AFD adopts strong positions on issues relating to economic recovery, energy supply, and migration control. And so it's not just migration, right? Like, Germany has always been the engine room of the European Union. Everything is based on that alliance between France and Germany. You've had German economic might, but that they are an absolute industrial powerhouse, and they're also a very, very industrious society. And then you have France, which is such a cultural capital, and yet today France is really on the world stage little more than a museum, and Germany has absolutely slit its own throat by adopting a very, very climate nonsense approach to its energy policy, right? So what they've done is across Germany, they've just spent huge amounts of money on quote unquote renewable energy sources that are just not working out for them and are not powering their industries. On top of that, you have Nord Stream 2, the pipeline, being sabotaged, and the huge amount of geopolitical cost in buying and importing Russian gas to power German industry, and it has caused their economy to stagnate. There are huge energy shortages and the cost of it. And Excalibur, I can see, who's in the chat, he will have a lot to say about how that's the same in Great Britain. You have all of these all of these countries that have embraced the nonsense of climate Scientology, and it is destroying their economies. And Musk is right to not just in that sentence, I reckon, talk about the migration issue, because to many people it isn't, but to focus on what does really matter, as you said at the top of the broadcast. It's the economics and what is hitting people in the back pocket. All right. Okay. Well, guys, I think, what do you reckon, Eeryk? Should we take a bit of a break and come back? We've been going now for goodness, about an hour and 15 minutes. We've probably got about 45 minutes to go. Should we take a break, play some tunes, maybe let everyone listen to some music for a bit?
Sure, break works here.
Okay. All right, guys, we're going to do that. Going to play a few tunes, and then Eeryk and I will have a chat. We'll come back to you with a couple of a couple of other articles and areas that we wanted to talk about, and answer a few questions from the chat. All right, guys, you are watching the Eeryk and Simon Show. I hope you're enjoying our first attempt at collaborating. Oh, guys, I didn't want to cut that track. I really like the new track that's coming in. Look, for the next thing we wanted to talk about was the Treaty Principles Bill. I've been keeping my powder a little bit dry there, but Eeryk's all over it, and he sent me an article earlier today from the New Zealand Herald that I'll share with you now. Hang on a sec, I'll share it with Eeryk first so he knows what we're talking about. Oh yeah, can you see that, Eeryk?
Yeah, we can see it fine here.
Yeah, sweet as, mate. Okay, all right. Well, look, let's bring it up so that the audience can see it too. Yeah, so I got an email from RCR Radio saying that today was the last day that you could make submissions upon it. So all of that's in train. So what do you reckon about this stuff? Take us through it.
Yeah, so I think the Treaty Principles Bill is something interesting, and I even see some people who try and keep themselves kind of out of politics to a certain degree. Certainly, some TikTok creators, and they kind of just like, I don't really like any politicians particularly much, but what I do know about these parties is they're this, this, and this, and David Seymour's a racist prick, and that's the kind of general sentiment from those who aren't that engaged in politics that I tend to get or tend to see because of this bill. And I think sometimes it's very, very important to outline what exactly the bill does and why, or why it's in front of us in the first place right now. And so what I've got on my screen down is I'll scroll down to just what the three principles say, which is just below that image there, Simon.
Yep.
Um, And essentially, what I want to quickly do is I just want to read out what they say, and then outline why we're in this position in the first place. Because no matter how long you've followed myself, Simon, whether this is your first time here, it never hurts to have a better understanding of what this is. So, in the off chance that we do come to a referendum, you have at least the best possible understanding you can get, or at least have a perspective from another source that isn't the media or that isn't the politicians. And so I'll quickly read out what these three principles are. So the first principle is that the executive government of New Zealand has full power to govern, and the Parliament of New Zealand has full power to make laws in the best interest of everyone and in accordance with the rule of law and the maintenance of a free and democratic society. Principle two is that the Crown recognises and will respect and protect the rights that Hapu and Iwi Māori had under the Treaty of Waitangi at the time they signed it. However, if those rights differ from the rights of everyone else, subclause 1 applies only if those rights we agreed in are agreed in the settlement of a historical treaty claim under the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975. And then principle 3 is that everyone is equal before the law, everyone is entitled without discrimination to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law and the equal enjoyment of the same fundamental human rights. Now, the reason we have this before us right now is because in the 1975, when the Treaty of Waitangi Act was made, the Labour government at the time decided it'd be a swell idea to make reference to principles that did not exist. And so, coming into the 80s, where we had a few different um, court cases, I think that one was notably between the New Zealand Māori Council and the Court of Appeal, we're in a situation where the judge was put in a position to come to a decision on a case that referenced principles, yet no principles had been outlined. And so he took it upon himself to establish what principles um, the Treaty of Waitangi was giving all of us. What was it that the Crown and iwi were agreeing to at the time um, in terms of principles rather than what the text had to say? And so he came up with a few different things. And over the last 40 years, those have kind of evolved into what is quite frankly a mess that is malleable, um, changing all the time, and is really just being used to manipulate not only results in the Waitangi Tribunal and in court cases, but also dictate what the government can and cannot do, what laws they can and cannot pass, or at the very least inform them what is politically acceptable and what's politically not acceptable in accordance with whatever these activists in the Waitangi Tribunal and academia dictate to them in accordance with these ever changing principles. So that's why David Seymour and ACT came up and said, okay, let's take the power of the principles out of the hands of academics, out of the hands of activists, and have the government dictate what they are because it's the government that made sure that they existed in the first place. If the government in 1975 wants to claim there are principles, then the government of the day should dictate what they are. So he simply decided we're going to look at what the Treaty of Waitangi says and take each of those articles and come up with a single principle for each of them. By doing that, we can establish what the core principles of the bill or of the treaty is supposed to be, and just put that into law. And so, what some people are worried about is that there are no principles, and with there being no principles, we should not have them at all. The idea that we'd have principles related to a document that where none were agreed to, none were outlined, is preposterous, and that's why we've got the likes of New Zealand First opposing it. However, when those principles are a mere reflection of the text itself, that I think most of us, generally speaking, have no issue with acknowledging we agreed and signed. That makes the idea of these principles being separate and different kind of defunct. Everything about these principles, as I've just read to you, exactly is an exact representation, as close to an exact representation of the Treaty of Waitangi itself as you can possibly get. So all it does is right a wrong, whilst appeasing, or at least working within the mess that was made, 40, 50 years ago. Um, and so I look at Principle One and I acknowledge it's just the first article of the Treaty of Waitangi. I look at Principle 2 and I go, it's just the second article of the Treaty of Waitangi. And again, with Principle 3, I look at it and all it is the third article of the Treaty of Waitangi, just written in the form of a principle that we can just all agree to or not, and then move on from there.
Uh,
What?
to interrupt your flow for a minute, it seems to me that it's just become a vehicle for grifters. That,
Mm,
in point of fact, what it comes down to is a basic disagreement about equity versus equality. And for the far left and for the separatists, they believe in equity, which is equality of outcome, rather than equality, which is poorly defined as equality of opportunity. To them, it is the worst thing in the world that a person who keeps themselves fit, who eats right, looks after their weight, goes to their doctor's appointments, lives for 7 years longer than someone who eats KFC 3 times a day and has a lifelong meth, tobacco, and alcohol habit. To them, that is an inequity in society because one of them died, one of them made lifestyle choices that ended their life sooner. That needs to be addressed by society. And it leads them to ridiculous positions like, and we see this from the left. It is from our media, from every commentator on the left on this debate is arguing that equality is racism, when the precise opposite is true. Equity is racism. Why I don't know why we don't see our media ever say to Chris Hipkins, to Chloe Swarbrick, to Rawiti Half-Witty, what don't you like about equality?
well, yes, exactly, and I couldn't agree more. And I say this on occasion. It's like the whole supposed idea of equity is to reach equality of outcome. But in order to achieve equality of outcome, you have to implement inequality. And to implement inequality, you then create a disparity in outcome so that all of a sudden the kind of numbers at the end all look the same, but you're deliberately disadvantaging other people, treating them differently, in fact, maybe even causing them to die earlier or to get worse outcomes in order for it to come to some kind of, you know, crossroads or equal point at the end. But you're not treating anyone equal along the way. So what's the point of achieving equality of outcome if you have to treat everyone as different, as unequal to get there? And then that's before you realize it's literally impossible to achieve equality of outcome anyway.
Oh, it absolutely is, and it's really fascinating. Like you see with the voice to Parliament vote that the leftists in Australia were pushing really hard. What the Aboriginal community and the leftists over there, like Anthony Albanese, were pushing for was to have a New Zealand like treaty signed in 2025 between the Australian state and Aboriginal people, because they could see that it was a vehicle to achieve their social objectives, just like our leftists and our separatists do in New Zealand. And I think that two things about that. The first thing I will say is that I think it's just absolutely atrocious that there are a whole bunch of Maori separatists who went over to advise the Australians on doing this sort of stuff. But the second point I would make is that that is what the separatists in Australia want, is an absolutely damning indictment of what the treaty means to New Zealand. But stepping back from that for a moment, one thing I'd like you to consider is despite all of this debate, despite the amorphous principles, because it suits the separatists for the principles never to be defined, right? And for tikanga and other forms of pre-discovery of the wheel approach to jurisprudence. You can make it up however you want. But stepping back from that, if we look at the treaty as a founding document, what we should ask ourselves is it where we want to go as a society? Is it relevant to modern New Zealand? And I'll give you an example. One of the great things about the American Constitution is that it is a living document. It is possible to have modifications to it over time. We have done that with the Treaty of Waitangi, only it's never been agreed. It has been interpreted, as you say, but by extremists, by activists in academia, and by activists in the judiciary. So from a young person's perspective, my question for you is, what value do you see in the Treaty of Waitangi itself for modern New Zealand society?
Yeah, for me, it plays only really. It serves as being something that's historically relevant and of importance. But as you say, does that really does it have any value right now and into the future? Because we could rip the whole thing up tomorrow, and it really have no impact on us whatsoever. We're not going to suddenly disestablish the New Zealand government because we rip it up. It's not going to have any feeling. It might cause some societal chaos for a little bit, with maybe 5% of the country losing their minds. But outside of it being the what really established our government, it has served to divide us and nothing more. And so for me, and I've become more and more in favour of this with every passing day. It's a sort of thing where we should be able to take the establishment of our government from it, acknowledge that's happened, and then a couple key points or intentions of it, and implement that into a brand new constitution that we can agree to and have going forward, as you've mentioned with the US constitution, as a living constitution which through a rigorous process can be amended with the times. And so I'd be all for that sort of thing, because for me, whilst the treaty means something to me which I feel like can work in the modern day, it's too divisive. It's to some degree, there is some subjectivity there with how people interpret it and its role in our society. And so, all I need from it is an acknowledgement that the New Zealand government exists and is here to stay, and also the right of us all to be treated as equals. As long as I've got that, I really couldn't care what the Treaty of Waitangi does.
Yeah, and I think that the pendulum is pushing back, and I think that that New Zealand First, but to a greater degree, the National Party, have seriously underestimated how much people care about this. Like, people forget that Labor politicians like that the gay dude who was their MP from Rotorua was saying the nature of democracy has changed, and Mahuta the looter was saying one person, one vote works until it doesn't. We need to have Maori around the decision table. It was very much their approach. Democracy is over. We're pushing through Hipuapua, whether you like it or not, and we're going to do it surreptitiously. And many, many New Zealanders think that that is an absolute wrong, and it needs to be not just stopped, but ensure that it can never rise again. And I think that many people look at this Treaty Principles Bill and say, right, if we do this, we can actually solve these issues. It's time now to realize that we shouldn't have guys like John Tamahiri running around getting hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to do who knows what, have Mahuta and all of those kind of, almost it seems like, gang associated people in the Waikato giving contracts to one another with public money, all of that kind of nonsense, burning huts in the Urawiwas, all of that sort of stuff. I think society is really, really has had enough of, and I think that National would be wise to get with the program, because if not today, tomorrow, I think the majority of Kiwis are going to have something to say about this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's going to surprise. I think the National Party in particular in 2026, when especially if the Treaty Principles Bill doesn't go through to a referendum, I think it's going to surprise them what their party vote looks like in 2026, when ACT's suddenly there with anywhere from 15 to 25%, um, and and this is the other thing. I'm not sure if New Zealand First is going to be relevant at all, because whilst many of us have a soft spot for them for a slightly more socially conservative approach to things, as well as their stance on immigration being a little bit more favourable to the other two parties on the centre right and the left as a national. Um, you know, they still always struggle to perform at elections when they've been in government. no matter how good their policy agenda is. So um, I think National is going to be shocked in 2026, especially if we've got no referendum. And it's all because they're out of touch with what people think on this particular issue. And it's this, but to that same point, it's almost like those in the middle and those in the center right are kind of moving away from National, or a little bit out of sync with them on this particular issue. But to the same extent, those on the left are moving away from Labour and are a little bit more in bed with the whole separatist idea, as we can see with the polling, at least with the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. I mean, what on earth is going on there? It seems one side of the spectrum is pissed off that National is too in bed with the separatist, or at least allowing that to continue, and then those on the left are not very happy with Labour because whilst they have had a lot of sentiment in favour of the Māori Parliament, or one person one vote not being not necessarily working anymore, they're still moving to the very pro-separatist parties, and so it really is extremely split on this issue, and that's why I think we're getting a lot of mixed signals, and certainly National is very hesitant to go and back ACT's proposal, because they still haven't quite got through their head yet that the lunatics voting for the Greens, Te Pāti Māori and Labour are never going to come vote for them simply because they take a moderate or a fence-sitting stance on this issue.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. And I think that they're practicing the politics of 5 or 6 years ago by looking to be beige, by looking to try and, broad majority and hit the centre of the Overton window. What they haven't realised is that the world has changed and it is much, much more polarised now. And politicians who are effective with right-wing policies like Millet are winning the argument. And beige politicians who are nominally of the centre-right, the likes of Cindy Boy Luxon, are losing out, because it's if you ask me, it's just absolutely a miscalculation. Phil in the chat notes, National voters were warned this was National's agenda, and Phil, you're exactly right. But as I said to you, that I think it was you I said it to last night, but I certainly said it on the broadcast, I just didn't trust Winston Peters enough. But I think a lot of people at the last election realised that National wasn't everything that we could want, but they were better than the far left extremism we were getting from the Labour Party, and that they were a safe bet. But as Eeryk says, I think that is probably not going to be the case come the next election. I think a lot of people are extremely disappointed with National in general and with Chris Luxon in particular. But I thought that we've got about another sort of 25 minutes to go, guys. We thought we would do about a 2-hour episode for our first one, and I think it's gone pretty well. What do you reckon, Eeryk?
Yeah, I think overall, I think we've covered quite a bit, and you certainly educated me on a few things, so I like that.
Oh, well, no, I don't think so, because, like as I always do, I was just talking bollocks. But for our last sort of 25 minutes, I see there was another article you wanted to talk to about that dude, Tom Phillips. But before then, I thought maybe we'd talk about some of your predictions for 2025. And to get us started, I thought I'd bring up this article from Euronews, which I came across, guys, and I'm gonna bring that up for you too. Eeryk, is that on your screen?
Yes.
It is. Okay. All right, guys. This came to us from Euronews. Hold on a sec. Just make sure that I have got Eeryk's microphone on. I do in this scene. Guys, I thought this was pretty funny, and I do want to hear what Eeryk reckons is going to be happening in 2025 and the year ahead. But I thought I'd use this to get us thinking about it. So this comes from Euronews. I read Euronews pretty regularly. They're pretty good at sort of like, for generalist coverage of news in Europe. And what I really like about them is that they cover news that you don't get in the English language very much for areas of Europe that aren't mainstream. So you get articles, for instance, about Poland or Hungary or Bulgaria that you wouldn't normally see in the traditional English language press, but they are centrist, kind of centre left. And I thought this was great. This is predictions for 2025. Top experts from various fields tell us what they expect from the new year. Okay, so keep in mind, this is the view of top experts. Expert one, Wim Warders, Nuiza Neighbor, and other figures share their predictions. Bertrand Piccard, Swiss explorer and founder of Solar Impulse. He reckons if we have more kindness, wisdom, and compassion, the world will be a better place. Yeah, talk about it walking, Hippie. What do you reckon, Eric?
Well, actually, quickly to that, yeah. The issue with his whole theory is that in order to have kindness, wisdom, and compassion, you have to basically get rid of the kindness and compassion because otherwise you won't have wisdom. Um, that's fundamental issue. He thinks that you can have all three at once, and the problem with that is his version of compassion and kindness will certainly be something that disregards wisdom altogether. The most wise people understand that kindness and compassion doesn't always look like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Well said, young man. Well said. Okay, well, the next one is Louisa Neubauer, and I've mangled her name. She's a German climate protection activist. She writes, truth will be the most valuable commodity in the coming years, and it will be fought against from many sides. And the third thing I also see for next year is a whole lot of unlikely heroic stories. What do you reckon?
Unlike the heroic stories, I can certainly see that happening. There's always heroic stories every year. Um, but as for truth being the most valuable commodity, I mean, yes and no. Um, as we've seen in the last few years, lies have been the most valuable commodity. Um, but I feel like those who it depends what you place value on. I think many of us place value on the truth, and as such, we will see the benefits of speaking the truth. Come into fruition over the next year. Um, but yeah, I think it's obviously not that black and white.
No, and I also think it's pretty ridiculous to hear a climate activist talk about truth. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, what would you know? Like, you're there gluing your hands to pavement and singing nursery rhymes about myths. Truth is the last thing that
Mm.
people like you engage in. All right, so we've got a dude who's a Belgian musician. He says, for 2025, I would like to predict a digital health in much better shape than what we currently know. I wish we would really focus on our friends. I predict a year where we focus on our real social connections and not those that aren't real.
Well, he kind of needs that, doesn't he? He's a musician. Um, but look, that's something I certainly don't see the 15-year-olds agreeing with that one. I think he's kind of not going to have much luck with that prediction, in my opinion.
Okay, the next one is a Spanish journalist, Neves Herrero. The first, an end to wars, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza. Too many victims, too much pain, too much violence. Secondly, I hope that we will all succeed with our writing and promoting harmony. And thirdly, I hope that women stop being the victims of violence in our homes, achieving a 2025 with equality and with respect.
Yeah, I think the war issue's somewhat unpredictable. Um, I certainly think we're far more likely to see an end to the two major wars this year under Trump than we were if it was Harris. But those wars are far too complicated to be able to bank on it 100% happening. I do feel like Ukraine Russia could certainly have some form of resolution or several year long ceasefire. Um, the likely annexation of that east coast, or not east coast, but eastern area. Um, but the Israel one's a bit of a doozy, simply because of how many nations are involved. The fact that, yeah, especially for us religious folks, we deep down inside of us almost don't want it to stop, because we know the continuing war has biblical implications. Um, so like we want it to come to an end, but also we appreciate what's happening, why it's happening, what a continuance could mean for the future versus what it ending now means. Um, we all know from a as far as prophecy is concerned that it's going to get really really bad. So sure, in the short term, for us that want to be selfish, it'd be great to see it end. Um,
Okay, yeah, and
mm,
I think I seem to remember we spoke about the subject when I was the Dalai Lama and you were the Pope, but I
yes.
quite like this dude Herrero. The world he paints actually sounds pretty good. It's a world I'd like to live in. An end towards um, success with writing and promoting harmony. That's a good thing. And women stop being victims of violence. I find very little to argue with about with all of that. But then there's Paul Watson, and it's not the Paul Watson that we know. Unfortunately, it's a Canadian animal rights activist and
Ooh,
founder of Sea Shepherd Conservative
I don't like him.
Society. Right, he's that fat dude that runs around harassing Japanese people, from what I can tell, that South Park took the mickey out of. Paul Watson is optimistic about ending whaling and raising environmental awareness. My predictions for 2025 are that, first of all, I believe that we can shut down Icelandic whaling. Secondly, I think that we'll bring more awareness to the Danish Faroe Islands to end the horrific slaughter of dolphins and pilot whales there. And also, we're going to put pressure on Japan to end whaling. Okay, all right. Well, good luck with all of that, mate. It's really interesting, isn't it? That some cultural aspect, some people's cultures do things that others find objectionable, right? Like Hindus don't like that non-Hindus eat cows, and they've even killed people in India who've been accused of killing cows. Similarly, this guy here doesn't like that some cultures kill whales and dolphins. I've got to say that I'm really conscious of the fact that those are beautiful animals and they have really big brains, and I don't think that they should be killed either. But I also think that it's really a selective morality. Guys like this run around thinking, okay, I'm going to impose what I think your culture should.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. Um, yeah, I'm in the same boat as you are. I don't like whaling. I don't like killing dolphins. At the same time, should I have the authority to dictate what everyone can do? Um, I appreciate conservation efforts for sure for like endangered species. But I don't think I should be able to turn around and say, "Hey, Japan, you're not allowed to whale at all."
All right. Well, Maya just told me off in the chat. She says, "I love Sea Shepherd." So that is me told. And Maya, she is a lovely lady, but I am scared of her. So I'm going to think deeply about what she's had to say. All right. For the last one we have is Wim Wenders, who's a German filmmaker, expresses concern about the direction of global politics and the climate. This planet is suffering tremendously, all of it going the wrong direction. In terms of politics, old ideas that didn't work before are coming back. Nationalism is on the rise again. The idea of Europe is a much more beautiful idea. To her, I think that Vim is a woman's name, so I'm just going to assume it is. To her, I would say the idea of Europe is a much more beautiful idea. Maybe so, but the actuality, as opposed to the idea, has not been a bed of roses.
Mm.
What do you reckon about this sort of stuff? Do you
Well,
think?
I can probably bring immigration back into this. She says the idea of Europe, okay, maybe the idea of Europe 40, 50 years ago versus now where it's basically just Europe, the Middle East and Africa and Asia all mixed into one in a political, I don't know, tornado, everything just spinning around in circles. No one can agree on anything. Um, yeah, no, I think if you don't like it, move to the moon.
I remember. Did you catch the other week? There was an article. I think it was on News Talk ZB about how only 3% of the immigration visas that were granted into New Zealand were skilled migrants.
Yeah, that's just not good enough.
It's really
Yeah.
not. And my friend Francesca, if Francesca, if you're in the chat, hello, happy New Year. Bon année. I know Francesca because she was living in New Zealand on a working holiday. She worked here for a couple of years, got an extension on her visa, and then decided that she would like to stay. Now, the thing about Francesca, I'm sure she won't mind me telling you, is that she's an Italian lady. She's fluent in Italian, Spanish, English and French. She studied in France at the University of Toulon, where she got a PhD. My friend Dr. Francesca, a PhD in neuroscience. Now, she was here. She had a job. She was working in project management, and was looking to work more in her specific field, but couldn't get enough points to remain in this country.
Yeah, I mean that's lunacy.
It's a lunacy, right? That to have someone who is actually integrated into our society, is a nice person, has friends, relationships, all of that sort of stuff here, and is extremely qualified, and yet can't stay. Now, the problem was, of course, that for the Labor government of the time, they didn't want immigrants like that. That does not suit their purposes. To Keir Starmer in Great Britain, to Anthony Albanese in Australia, to Justin Castro in Canada, and to Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins in New Zealand, Mexican type immigrants into the United States is what they are looking for. They're looking for people who are dependent upon the state because it helps them to grow their voter base, and it helps them to centralize economic activity in the state. When everyone is a beneficiary of it, the state has a lot of control, and the socialists like that, I reckon.
Yeah, and what I find interesting is sometimes I think about immigrants from certain countries. I'm like, okay, what's like the dominant kind of political, um, ideology in those particular countries? What typically tends to be more common? Are they typically more left leaning? Are they typically more right leaning? And I think governments will factor that in when they're thinking about who do we want to let in for immigration. And so, whilst I was about to make a joke about how I think we should regard Irish immigrants um, as being skilled workers because you just can't have an Irish pub without an Irish waitress. Um, at the same time, I'm not sure if I want the Irish to come over here and tell us what was good politically. So, yeah, we'll leave it there.
Okay, all right. Well, look, guys, I've just had a look. There's about 900 people tuned in on my channels. How many? How many are on yours, Eeryk?
About 190. So that's good.
190. Okay, actually, I've just looked again. It's actually up. It's up. It's almost 1,000 people. So, hello, everyone. You are watching the very first ever episode of the Eeryk and Simon show. All right, and we've been going for almost 2 hours, you guys. So we're reaching the end, and I'm sorry, everyone, that I haven't gone through everyone's chat in a lot of detail. It's still, even with the two of us, in fact, the production workload is quite large. I'm hosting Eeryk tonight. Probably the next time we do it, I'll get him to host so that I can do something else. But I think the last story that we'll talk about is something I haven't followed in very much detail, but Eeryk has, and it's this dude. I mean, all I know about it is there's some dude who's run away into the forest in New Zealand, and he's been at it for months. With his kids, and it's to the point where the authorities have been chasing this guy, and I think the police have released like they've set a bounty on him, all sorts of things. But guys, I'm going to bring up this article because Eeryk wanted to talk about it. So anyway, his name's Tom Phillips. Over to you, Eeryk.
Why I wanted to bring it up, and it was less so to discuss the specifics, but more the moral conundrum of it all. Because there will be people, especially in the Marakopa community, who are more or less being portrayed as people who are harboring him or hiding him or aiding him in his, um, his new bush life with his kids. And for me, it's one of these weird things where it's like I kind of agree with following the law and all of that, but from what I've heard and from there are many people that I've seen on X in particular comment on it. They it's is he doing what he thinks is in the best interest of his kids? And if so, should we help the police find him, or should we let him continue doing what he's doing because of, let's say, the circumstances of why he took off with them in the first place? And I really thought it would be interesting to see what you thought on the matter, because from what I know is there was issues with him and his partner, who's the mother of the kids, and a dispute there, and he's taken off with the kids for almost 3 years, and there's just been an effort over that time to find them, and people worried that maybe the kids weren't, in the best of health, and that they had got them involved in criminal activity. But I think that's been more or less debunked at this point. Um, and then recently we had a sighting of them, and they all looked very, very healthy. So for me, I'm not even sure whether or not I want the police to find them, and I'm interested to hear what you think.
Oh, well, as I said, I haven't been following it in any great detail, but I would take a steer from Taz Dunstan. For those who may recall, Taz Dunstan was, I guess, she came on the show to talk to me about a bunch of stuff that she does, being a Mackenzie friend and helping people navigate the New Zealand legal system. And one of the points she made was just, and you know, many people that you and I both share as friends and associates on social media platforms, was talking very much about how New Zealand really does not honour the Hague Convention on the rights of the child, and that there is a great deal of corruption that goes on with Oranga Tamariki. For those outside of New Zealand, that's effectively the social agency that deals with people that are under the age of 16, and with the family courts. So, you know, I'm always suspicious in these circumstances when the authorities get involved, because I think that often they don't make the right decisions. But I have to counterbalance that with the consideration that there's obviously been some sort of relationship breakdown here, that there is a mother involved as well. And, you know, far be it from me to be making any sort of moral judgment, because you know what it's like when people's relationships break down. It's, you know, it's difficult all around, and it's, you know, trying to assign blame to one party or the other is never a good thing. And I think in those sorts of circumstances, it is best for everyone, for the parents particularly, and often they are the least likely to, but the courts, the Oranga Tamariki and other social agencies, and certainly commentators like me who don't know the people involved, to just be focused upon what is the best possible outcome for the children.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing is I think there was just anecdotally from dumb discourse I'm saying, don't want to mean to slander anyone. There was some concern about the ability of the mother to take care of the kids, and so I think there was hesitancy from some people involved closely with Tom Phillips to remotely help the mother get her kids back, and also the lack of trust in the likes of Oranga Tamariki. Because if, let's say, Oranga Tamariki decide, what, the father clearly isn't able to, look after these kids because he would be willing to go and take them into the bush for 3 years, and then the mother has some issues as well, then all of a sudden Oranga Tamariki's in charge of these kids, and no one really has much faith in Oranga Tamariki to make the right decisions either. So for me, yeah, it's a moral conundrum, and on a personal level, as long as the kids are healthy, I'm, I can sleep at night.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. That's good. And so you're saying there's been a sighting of this dude
See,
and the kids recently?
there was a sighting a couple months ago, maybe 3 4 months ago. Yeah, just in the bush, and some other hikers saw them and took a photo, and they look very healthy. But yeah,
Okay. All right. So this family, it's a dude and three kids, and they've just absolutely gone bush, and they're
yep.
just living off the land, and what, they're just running around. They've got backpacks on, like cooking equipment, hunting for their food, or scavenging,
Um,
or
yeah,
foraging. What are they doing?
it is believed that there is some outside help from people that he'll know that are kind of protecting them to some degree. But I think for the most part, there is a lot of just living bush and survival skills being used there. But I mean, unless people come out and start whistleblowing or opening up about them actually helping, we won't really know exactly how he's managing it. But 3 years is pretty impressive with three kids.
Yeah, it really is. How old are the kids?
Well, they look all under 10 mostly, if one might be a little older. Oh, yeah, Jada was 10, or 8, 9, and 10, yeah.
Right, gee, yeah, well, you're
Yeah.
right. It's 3 years of doing that with quite young children. But then, I mean, he's obviously a very, very capable chap if he can do that. And I have heard on the sly that he does have a lot of community support, that there are
Mm.
people who are taking sides in that relationship breakdown. and it tends to be, as is always the case. Some people take one side, some people take the other, and it wouldn't surprise me if those people are helping him out. But obviously, he's very, very capable. But when it comes to the kids, in terms of their development, it's not just their health. There's social development, there's socialization, there's education, and all those sorts of aspects. So one can hope that man is attending to those sorts of needs as well. You'd hope. What do you reckon? Do you think he is?
I don't think he's capable of doing it to the level that they probably need, if we're being honest. But I mean, they'll certainly be. I mean, I suppose Tarzan did all right when he came back to the real world.
All right, mate. Well, look, I think we did pretty well. You and I, we've been on for a couple of hours. I think as first attempts at doing a collaboration remotely, it went pretty well. What did you reckon?
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I think overall we kept it flowing best we could, and I think we managed to get quite a few people engaged. So I'm happy on this end.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, look, guys, we've been going for 2 hours. This was the inaugural episode, a one-off so far of the Eeryk and Simon show. I really enjoyed it as well. So maybe I'll have a chat to Eeryk, and we'll set something up. Maybe do another one from time to time. But look, let us know. If you enjoyed what we did, tell us what we could do better, what you would like to see, that sort of thing, and because the two of us doing stuff, it gives us an opportunity to sort of to do different things than what we have been doing, what Eeryk's been doing on his channel, what I've been doing with Simon TV. So we're certainly open to suggestions. I saw that there was a comment from concerned someone or other on YouTube. Yeah, we do have a dial-in capability, right? Like we can take other callers in. It does take a little bit of doing, it means, I can't sort of really organize that while I'm also talking to Eeryk. But we can certainly do things like talk back and that sort of stuff. But the other thing is that it's probably not apparent to you unless you're watching my Instagram or YouTube channels, which are the two that are going out in portrait. But it's in portrait mode, it's a little bit difficult to squeeze it all on the screen. But yeah, we could do something like that as well. All right, guys. Well, look, I think on that note, it's good evening from me and
good evening from me too.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us. And thanks, Eeryk. Good on you, mate.
Thank you. Cheers.
All right. Bye, everyone. All right. Bye, everyone.